part 3 of our Photoshop introduction. One of the other great things you can do on Photoshop or any computer rendering is once it's set up, it lets you adapt it very quickly. If you're doing a drawing like this by hand, once you've drawn it, that's it. You can't change colors, you can't change shapes, you can't do anything like that. Whereas on Photoshop, we can change it as much as we want. So we wanted to change the color of the body. It's on its own layer, all of the blue sections. We've got a tool up here under Image, Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. The top slider, the hue, is the shade of color. By simply dragging this into different locations, we instantly change the color. The middle slider is the saturation, which is how bright that color is. So putting it right down here will make it so dull that it turns to grey. Putting it the whole way up the other way will make it almost neon hypercolor. The last one is the overall lightness and darkness of it. So if we put it to grey and turn it the whole way down, we can make a black car. If we leave it on grey and turn it up, we can make a white car. And of course, putting it in the middle lets us change the color overall. Fiddling with that saturation will change how intense the color is. When we're done, we hit OK and the change is made. This works for the background, works for anything else. It just needs to be on its own separate layer. Alternatively, if you have a selection, the hue and the saturation will work only for what's in that box. A time you might use this, say you're doing a race car or something with stripes, you render it all one color, and then if I wanted the stripes going across the race car like this, then I can come back to my hue and saturation and put in the different color two-tone stripe. Because everything's on separate layers, we can also change sizes and positioning and things like that. If we find the layer with the wheels, we might like to press Command T or Control T on a PC, which goes to transform mode, and this is a really handy tool for lots of different things. The basic thing it lets you do is change the size. Holding Shift will stop it from being squished like this. It will constrain the proportions. You can also rotate around, and even better, right clicking on this brings up a whole nother set of options. We've got skew. You can see here we're adding some perspective, but there is actually a tool for that as well, which will distort things for you. Also got things like warp. When you're done, either press Enter or hit the tick. If you change your mind, press Escape or this button here. Say you had done a sketch of something and you weren't quite happy with it. Photoshop, before we get drawing, allows us to edit it and work on it and just get it looking a little bit better. We'll use the example of this sketch here. Up the top here, under Filters, there is a tool called Liquify. And what it does is load up your objects and you get a target. When you click and move that target, you can squash your drawing around. Say you had drawn a product that you were mostly happy with, but it was sticking out a little bit too much in one corner. Simply make the brush bigger, click, and push it back in to where you wanted it to be. If you're editing someone's face, you can get quite a humorous effect by distorting it. There's a whole bunch of other filters that are worth playing with. In general, it's worth just going through all of these different filters. For example, a nice one is lens flare. Say this section here was particularly shiny, can see we've made it look a little bit shiny. We've added a lens flare. Other ones you might like to try are things like blurring, something like motion blur on a background behind an object will give it the impression that it's moving really fast by adding that blur. Other things are good for adding texture. That one's for turning things into an old-fashioned newsprint. It's called color halftone. And some of the other ones under stylize give you lots of different graphic effects. Anytime you're working in Photoshop and you feel like you've been working for a while doing lots of steps and you're not happy with it, there's actually more than one undo. There's a lot of undos. If you go up to history, we don't have many here, but it'll actually list all of the steps. So I'll do an example. So I was painting all over this and then I realized I hated it. I can go back as many or as few steps as a time back to where I'm happy and then continue working from there. Gives you a really big safety net for your work. When you're saving, it's very important to save as in the Photoshop format. When you finally finish with your drawing, then you can change it down to a JPEG to be shared on the internet, but not saving it in a Photoshop format will not preserve all of your different layers and effects and things like that.